Dear colleagues, friends, we're taking colossal risks with the future of civilization on Earth. We're degrading life support systems that we all depend on. We're actually pushing the entire Earth system to a point of destabilization, pushing Earth outside of the state that has supported civilization since we left the last ice age 10,000 years ago. This requires a transformation to safe and just Earth system boundaries for the whole world economy. The question is, why? These are the 16 tipping elements, the large biophysical systems that we have scientific evidence that it regulates the state of the entire climate system on Earth. 9 of these 16 are showing signs of instability. Push them too far, and they will shift over from supporting humanity to starting to undermine humanity. 4 of these are showing scientific evidence of now being at risk already at 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're approaching this point very rapidly. 2 of them, the Greenland ice sheet and the West Antarctic ice sheet, together represent 10 meters sea level rise. This shows scientifically that 1.5 degrees Celsius is a physical limit. It is not a political target. But what I say next will be the most alarming thing. We have more and more scientific evidence of connectivity between these tipping elements, cascade risk of dominoes. Let me give you one example. Here's the one that is most researched. Greenland ice sheet, accelerated melting, warming 4 times faster than the planet as a whole, releasing cold fresh water, slowing down the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic, pushing the whole monsoon system down further south, causing droughts and forest fires over the Amazon rainforest, one more tipping element system, locking warm surface water in the Southern Ocean, accelerating the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. The North Pole is connected to the South Pole in regulating the stability of the entire Earth system. Dear friends, scientifically, this is not a climate crisis. We are now facing something deeper. Mass extinction, air pollution, undermining ecosystem functions, really putting humanity's future at risk. This is a planetary crisis.
This is a safety crisis, but above all, it is also a justice crisis. Many areas in the world are uninhabitable. This uninhabitable zone is increasing. If we continue with our greenhouse gas emissions, then by 2070, as many as 3 billion people will live in uninhabitable zones, and mostly in poorer countries. And this basically means that these people who probably have the least contribution to the climate problem have been the ones that are most exposed. In times of crisis, a temporary humanitarian corridor opens up to enable people to escape from the danger zone. We need in this century a safe and just corridor for all people to exit the danger zone, but also to ensure that all people have access to basic needs, rights to water, food, energy, and infrastructure. This is a key question for scientists. Can we quantify safe and just Earth system boundaries or an Earth system corridor? In 2019, the Global Commons Alliance created the Earth Commission to answer this question. They invited natural and social scientists to push the boundary of science to discover an answer. 3 years later, we believe that we have quantified safe and just boundaries for the different domains. And in this, we include justice between people within generations, and justice between people and nature. We can say with certainty that if we do not include justice, then we will all be living in the danger zone.
So let's start with the safe boundary definitions. The first one is on climate. Scientifically, we conclude that 1.5 degrees Celsius is the safe boundary. This aligns with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, with one difference. We emphasize that this is a physical limit. Push it beyond that point, and we risk permanent damage on societies and the world economy. The second boundary is the biosphere. The biosphere is a fundamental basis for all human well-being, and we have 2 boundaries defined for the biosphere. The first one is the conclusion that at least 50 to 60% of intact nature must be remained on Earth to be able to support the world economy and the resilience of the entire Earth system. The second boundary is for all the managed land, agriculture, forestry, urban areas, that at least 25% of every square kilometer has to have natural levels of flora and fauna to be able to remain healthy and support the economy. The third boundary is on freshwater. Here we have two boundaries. One is that we have to keep at least 20% of natural flows and rivers intact for ecosystem services in aquatic systems. The second is very basic on groundwater, that extraction of groundwater levels must be less than the recharge levels across the world. On fertilizer use, one of these boundaries that are today overloading and causing dead zones, pollutants, also greenhouse gas, massive implications on water quality and coastal zones, we quantify here at the global level the maximum allowed loading of reactive nitrogen and reactive phosphorus used predominantly in fertilizer systems across the world. And finally, the boundary on air pollution, on aerosols, a boundary which we today have scientific evidence that it actually has impacts on regulating the state of the atmosphere and the hydrological cycle, pushing the monsoon systems in the southern hemisphere particularly into less rainfall provision. We have done this on the global level, and more targets need to be set also at the local level. So here we are, we have the full span of Earth system boundaries, and now the question is, what do these give in justice terms?
We interpret justice in terms of minimizing significant harm to people and meeting basic needs. Now, in terms of climate change, our justice boundary is more stringent than the safe boundary at 1 degree centigrade. This will not come as a surprise to those people who have suffered from the impacts of climate change. However, it has serious consequences for people, businesses, and countries. On the water issue, on the biosphere issue, our safe and just boundaries coincide. However, if you reserve large tracts of land for nature, then this has justice implications, and therefore we need just transformations. If you reserve land in every square kilometer of managed land, then this is good for nature and also good for preserving nature's contributions to people. On water, our safe and just boundaries coincide. But this also implies massively reducing our use of water. And this means we need innovation and we need redistribution. Civilizations have risen and fallen based on their ability to manage their scarce water resources. We are no different. On fertilizers, our safe and just boundary for nitrogen is more stringent than the safe boundary because of nitrogen's impact on water supply systems. Our safe and just boundaries for phosphorus are aligned. Other related justice issues are that we in the global north use too much fertilizer, and many countries in the global south use too little. On aerosols, the just and safe targets align at the global level, but we have complemented that with a local level target in order to ensure that we avoid the millions of deaths that take place annually every year today. Meeting minimum needs within these Earth system boundaries will require just transformation, innovation, and redistribution. Johan, are we still within the safe and just corridor?
So here comes the final verdict of the scientific assessment we have done. So we are today concluding that we're outside even of the just boundary on climate, and within the next decade, we are at risk of pushing ourselves outside of the safe boundary of 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is a really deep concern for humanity on the climate agenda. On the biosphere, we're also outside of the safe and just boundaries, which is already recognized in the Kunming and Montreal CBD 15 of the necessity of halting and reversing the loss of biodiversity by 2030, which entirely aligns with the Earth Commission's assessment that we now need to keep 50 to 60% of the Earth's surface intact. This means, from now onwards, zero loss of intact nature across the world economy. When it comes to water and nutrients, we're outside, well outside of the safe and just boundaries, and need a rapid transition on justice and safety in the food system in particular. On air pollution, we conclude that we are within the safe boundary at the global level, but 85% of the world population live in regions that are outside of the just local air pollution quality levels, which means that we have a challenge across all the 5 domains that we have assessed.
We are thus dangerously beyond the safe and just boundaries and are thus unable to avoid the tipping points as well as the widespread ecological injustices today and in the future. But there are amazing people worldwide that are working to protect the local to global commons. The next step is to involve businesses, countries, cities, and people worldwide to accept Earth system boundaries and the just transformations we need to live within these boundaries. We are today 8 billion people. Can we and our children expect to live within these safe and just boundaries? That depends on us. As scholars, we have pushed the envelope further in terms of both safety and climate, and we have made our science operationalizable. If we do nothing, if we do the minimum at this pivotal moment in our history, then we and our children, even if we are rich, will live in the danger zone. But if we business people, if we governments, citizens, cities, if we take action today, then we and our children will have a future worth looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Johan and Joyeeta for sharing a very grim but grounded analysis of where we are today and defining for us what is safe and just science, which needs to be translated to business, action, and policy. This is 3 years of hard work and collaboration among scientists to integrate natural and social sciences, as you've just seen. And it helps us, it is actually a quantum leap in how we understand the planetary boundaries. Beyond the 1.5-degree limit for climate, there are other interconnected global commons we need to think about: nature, fresh water, fertilizers, and aerosol pollutants. It also talks about how we need to minimize human exposure to significant harm from Earth so that all of us can have a dignified life. We have assembled today a diverse and very distinguished panel to share their reflections. They come from government, business, as well as civil society from different parts of the world. And the focus of our discussion today will be on leadership through Earth's new normal. With this grounding of science on safe and just, how should we exercise our responsibility as leaders? Marc, if I could just put you in the spotlight. First, you've been a very successful entrepreneur as well as philanthropist. And I hear that your leadership style is very much focused on building trust, also creating a work environment that enables your employees to adapt to change and to innovate to address the needs of the environment. But beyond this innovation is also the ability to persist and to have the patience to execute on this innovation successfully. I would like to hear from you, what are the innovations in business and in partnerships that you're most excited about? And how can we encourage business to embed more innovation capacity when they think about their net zero and nature positive strategies?
Thank you, Huay, and just want to thank them Can we have another round of applause for amazing presentation? Thank you. How many folks here in this room are in an organization, company, country that's committed to a net zero strategy already? Would you raise your hands if you're already committed to net zero? It's, you know, it's encouraging. It's not everyone in the room, but it's encouraging. I've been asking that of folks whenever I present, and it's been increasingly going up, but it's not everybody. I don't think everybody realizes that we all have to do this. We all have to do step number one. We have to commit to being net zero. We have to reduce our emissions. We have no choice. We just saw the evidence. This is the most important thing. We have to all make a commitment. We have to have intentionality. We have to decide, what do we really want? We have to know we want to be a net zero planet. We want to be a net zero world. And we want to also be nature positive. I think the evidence is crystal clear that it's two things. It's reduce emissions, number one, but it's also restore our ecosystems and protect them, conserve them, and restore them, number two. And I think that these two, this simple idea is kind of where it all starts. Number two is, and we started this the last time we were here in 2020, we need to sequester a lot of the CO2 that's already in the environment. And for me, that's why I created the Trillion Tree program, 1t.org. You know, we have now commitments from all you folks here for 125 billion trees, but we still need to go to 875 billion more. The reason why is because we need to sequester 200 gigatons of carbon, and we need to do that right now. This is super important. Now, that's not about planting trees necessarily, though that's certainly a part of it, but it's about protecting, it's conserving, it's about taking care of trees. Even the United States this year, two incredible acts, our infrastructure bill and our inflation bill, both had tree planting funding for the very first time in the US government history at scale. Fantastic. And number three is we need to innovate, just like we heard. We need to unleash an ecopreneur revolution. We need to get young people who are not to go necessarily to create next generation software companies like I did, but to go create all of these technologies that are going to help us to get there. You know, there's some great folks here at the conference that are already doing that. There's a great company, Planet Labs. They just launched a satellite called Carbon Mapper. It's the first time we have a satellite where we can see where is the carbon that we need to make sure that we can take care of, because those are our banks. And number two is, where is all the methane on the planet and where are the leaks? You know that we have no idea yet still how to visualize the methane. This is the first time we'll be able to do that. Another great entrepreneur here, Loam Bio from Sydney, Australia, building a next generation fertilizer, but it's not a fertilizer at all. Actually, it's mushrooms. And when you plant these mushrooms with soybeans, not only do you get crop yields to increase, not only do you double the amount of CO2 that's being sequestered, well, you don't use the nitrogen that you're getting in fertilizer. And I think we just saw a very compelling case of why that is absolutely so important. And the third thing that's extremely important is all these next generation battery technologies and so many other incredible things that we see emerging that could really change the game. In fact, where I live, which is on an island in Huay, well, we're about 50% renewable already. And we get that from solar, we get that from wind, and we have a volcano that we plug into called geothermal. But for us to get to the next 50%, we need to rebalance our grid with battery technologies, using next generation batteries like iron ore. These things are happening, and that's what's exciting. But we have to commit to being net zero. We have to commit to getting to 50% clean energy by 2030. And the folks that can make it happen, well, it's got to start right here with all of us. So I hope that the next time I ask the question, how many folks here are committed to being net zero and nature positive, every hand goes up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marc. Let me now turn to Roshni. For me, you always remind me of the future and the promise that the new generation can bring also to the table. You're the chairperson of HCL Technologies. First woman to lead a listed IT company in India. You're also involved in various efforts, building Leadership Academy for the economically less privileged. You're a founder of Habitat Trust that looks at conserving ecosystems, protecting species, animal species, to create sustainable ecosystems. And you're a driver of many seemingly different initiatives: company strategy, social enterprise, nature conservation. And one of the central themes of this year's annual meeting is about interconnection, interdependencies. And one of the great India philosophers, Shanti Deva, speaks about how to analyze complex things, recognize the network of causes and conditions that give rise to them. And what he says is this: everything is dependent on something else. Even that thing upon which each is dependent is not independent. Can you help me understand what the guru is saying? And how should we think about business, people, planet, economic growth, stewardship, responsibility, and connect the dots to make sense of our role and our responsibility in this world?
Thank you, Gimwe, and thank you so much for the presentation. I think the lens at which I look at the systems approach of how all biospheres is connected through fresh water, which is something that you raised in the presentation. I come from India, I live in India, and I can say that 85% of natural disasters in India and perhaps in the rest of the world are related to water and fresh water in specific, so longer wet seasons, longer droughts, impacts on livelihood, impacts on the most underserved women as well as children. So I think that a systems thinking approach, keeping fresh water at the center and realizing that all stakeholders are actually committed and connected is very important to recognize. I think what we collectively can do in a room like this is there are, as Marc mentioned, amazing solutions, entrepreneurs, and innovations which are in many parts of the world. And one of the things that we can do is that how do we actually get them to collaborate, to connect, to even pilot in different parts. I think some solutions tend to be local, but how can you actually take them global? And it all comes back to we cannot solve the climate crisis unless we address the freshwater crisis, and we have to look beyond carbon. And I do believe that there are many solutions out there, and we play the role of facilitators to allow those innovations to scale at speed.
Thank you, Roshni. If I could just bring the third business voice to the table before we get the reflections from the government as well as civil society. So Andrew, you are the executive chairman of Fortescue Metals. It's a mining company, and which many would consider an old industry, heavy emissions, large environmental footprint, but you've actually led the charge on net zero. And if I may, when you first announced net zero for Fortescue, it was by 2040, and that was your first announcement, it was met with a lot of skepticism. But most recently, what you actually did, you actually brought forward the deadline to get to net zero by 2030. And what you've also done is to add a new arm to your company called Fortescue Future Industries to make green hydrogen, develop clean energy technology. We've seen a lot of efforts by companies, they tell us the good news, but what we're seeing is that businesses are doing what they can, but not what they must to address the crisis. And I would like to ask you, how do we address concerns by business of staying competitive while dealing with the crisis? And what gives you that courage and confidence in charting a path that is still very new and almost scary for many of us?
Okay, thank you. It's a terrific question. I believe we should first start with the belief that we can do this, that we can even move beyond net zero, move to real zero. Second, if you have that in your mind, you need leadership. Leadership which we've all come to learn and to be inspired by here in Davos. Third, we need action, and fourth, we need collaboration. I remember the last time we all met in January, there was another pandemic about to break. It was COVID, but the pandemic I saw, I was here to try and defeat plastic entering the ocean. The pandemic I saw was a horrible acceptance that we couldn't do anything about global warming. We'd literally, as a human population, as an ecosystem of animals, have to suck up a 3% rise in temperature. Like COVID, that pandemic's not completely over either. I've been to meetings where I've heard scientists and others argue that we may have to get used to 2%. I can tell you as a scientist, that's an absolute disaster. So we started first with the belief that we can. We just started. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations, who I think is the greatest guy, along with other speakers, said we might not have the technology yet, but we'll get there. May I assure you, we have the technology right now. It's getting better, sure. It's improving, absolutely. But every industry in the world has sufficient technology now to start moving away from fossil fuels. We're just but one example, and I want to give you a public commitment. I'll do everything I can with my companies to stop global warming and to eliminate emissions. I'll do this by making sure every executive's bonus is attached to that target. And I'll do this because it's not only right for the planet, but what I'm reaching out to business people all over the world to say, this is good business. This morning, the global mining community met, and we discussed how we were going to collaborate. We started to believe last year, we're beginning to take action this year, and now we're going to collaborate. How can we together take what's seen as a laggard industry and make it one of the first industries to go green? I can tell you how. You put ammonia instead of diesel into your railway engines. You use hydrogen or electric power for your trucks. Use hydrogen or solar or wind or electrons and batteries for all your power stations. And before you know it, you're saving a huge amount of capital. If we have committed to spend $6.2 billion, we've made that public, to give ourselves real zero by 2030. We know how to do that. The technology's going to improve, and people who come after us will do it quicker and cheaper. But that $6.2 billion will pay itself off just through the construction period of at least half. We're down to nearly $3 billion. And then after that, over the next 20 years, we can either blow up another $20 billion on fossil fuel, or we can save $1 billion a year. That's a great investment against a net $3 billion. So my earnest request to every business leader is start. Believe you can. Take action, collaborate. I will share all the technologies we have. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year developing them. You can have our technology for free, but make a start, because the alternative is both uneconomic, eliminating emissions is great business, but it's also catastrophic if you do nothing today.
Great.
Thank you, Andrew. Fawn, if I may now turn to you. You're a Native American,
Yes.
and also president of the National Congress of American Indians. Just at this year's annual meeting, we have launched a report. For those of you who have not read it, please do. It's called Embedding Indigenous Knowledge in the Conservation and Restoration of Landscapes. And one of the highlights of this report talks about how indigenous people are one of the best stewards of nature. They represent 5% of humanity, but they actually protect 80% of Earth's biodiversity. 1/3 of all Earth's territories are owned or governed by indigenous communities and locals, and 91% of this land are actually in good or fair ecological condition. Right, so they are contributing disproportionately to the health of our ecosystem. But you're also at the front line of climate change.
Yes.
But you've evolved practices over centuries, right, on how to protect natural resources, but also build in climate resiliency to changing conditions. And we know, even as we mitigate and address all the problems that we've accumulated over the years, we need to adapt to how the climate is already changing. Can you share with us the voice from your community with the audience here? And what can business and government learn from you as they evolve their strategies and plans to address the climate and nature crisis?
Thank you, Siokwil. Auk Yohuch Anjak Haiwishka, thank you so much for the invitation. I think one of the first things that I think is important to understand from our perspective, we've been taught through the ages that every life form on the face of the planet has its proper place as divinely ordained by our Almighty Creator. When one looks to the human body and the complexities, every cell has an importance. And Chief Seattle taught us that all things are connected. What we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. We are but one strand in a very complex web of life. And our ancestors also foretold of a day of reckoning. And we are in that day of reckoning right now. At home at Quinault, when I served as president of my tribe, I had to declare multiple states of emergency due to sea level rise. I've taken a helicopter flight to see personally, face to face, the disappearance of our glaciers. The very place where my ancestors signed our treaty is now underwater. And we are not alone. Indigenous peoples all across the planet are on the front lines. We are also on the front lines of defending our relatives in the ocean, in the forests, from environmental genocide. Just since 1948, when the UN Declaration on the Rights of on human beings was adopted, the UN Declaration, 12 million indigenous peoples have been murdered since 1948. 40 million dispossessed of their traditional lands in our lifetime. And so I think when you look at the scale of that crisis of global injustice for centuries, one might think that we are weak and vulnerable. But I want to make it very clear here today, to the contrary, indigenous peoples are not weak and vulnerable. We are strong, we are resilient. We have in our DNA ancestral knowledge that goes back from that very first generation that was called to planet Earth. We were taught these things. And through the ages, generation after generation, we have taken that knowledge and we passed it on to future generations, looking 7 generations out. And so I personally have come in the last 4 months, face to face with sacred sites at Oak Flat, entering that sacred place where the San Carlos Apache people leapt to their death. And I felt the thunder. I've been at Cheyenne and Arapaho and offering prayers, and we were surrounded by 800 buffalo, and we could feel them, we could feel their energy, and we are taught the salmon cannot get out of the ocean to defend themselves in court and in lawsuits. But we are their voice, and we are their guardians, and we have that sacred duty. And so I would like to just offer some hope here. And my final comment, I think that we need to learn those lessons. We are taught to look to science. The scientific report, heed that. Have the political courage to make those decisions. Do not look at decisions as a cost of business. Look at decisions as human existence and our relatives' existence for generations to come. Listen to the alarms of our most vulnerable, our children who are taking the streets because they don't see a life into adulthood. Our natural world in the Pacific Northwest, Tahlequah, the orca whale who carried her dead calf for 17 days to alarm us that the Salish Sea off of Seattle is sick, dying. And also our faith leaders. They know that this crisis is much more than physical and environmental schisms. We have a deeply wounded spirit as a people that is in desperate need of healing and restoration. And we must look to our Almighty Creator to find our proper place in humanity, our proper place as that one strand. And we have everything in this room. When you look at the new and emerging science and technology, as far as the mind can see, and you look back centuries of traditional knowledge and wisdom from when time began, the wealth of this planet, if just spent in ways that adheres to the basic principles of our peoples, of our indigenous peoples, that is the path forward. Siokwil.
Very good.
Thank you, Fawn.
Thank you.
Thank you. We should have titled this session Turbocharging Leadership on Earth's New Normal. Vice President Al Gore, if I may call on you, you've been leading this for more than 40 years, shaping global conversations on climate change, encouraging the development, adoption of low-carbon technologies, You've promoted climate education and awareness among the youths and the activists. In fact, I've come across many of these young people who have been inspired by you to join environmental sustainability work in business. And you've also recently launched satellite technologies to track emissions, hold companies as well as countries accountable for their pledges. Johan and Joyeeta, they've tried to make the science simple for us. It was not easy. We gave them only 10 minutes. It is a very complex subject with a lot of intertwining issues and implications. But you've got a lot of experience as a politician, in business, as well as being an advocate and activist. And today I'd like to ask you, as a global leader, what advice do you have for all of us who want to contribute to be that force for good? What are some of the effective tools and levers that you think we should focus on and pull on as a global community?
Well, thank you, Kim Huay. I appreciate your leadership. Thank you for inviting me to be on this wonderful panel. And I want to compliment Johan and Joyeeta for their presentation at the beginning. And I'm certainly looking forward to my friend Yo-Yo Ma playing at the end of this panel. You know, we tend to emphasize the bad news, and there is unfortunately a lot of it. But there's a lot of good news as well. And I just want to cover some of it. In my country, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is primarily a climate act, $369 billion, which will actually be much larger than that because the heavy lifting is done by tax credits that are very long-term, some of them actually open-ended, and the early investments that have already been triggered by it give a great deal of many reasons for believing it's going to be much larger than $369 billion. So I'm very encouraged by that. Secondly, in Andrew's home country, Australia, the elections changed the climate policy of Australia. And then the elections in Brazil changed the climate policies in Brazil. So there is good news. We do have some momentum. The European Union has been mostly successful in balancing the need to respond to the short-term energy crisis caused by Russia's evil and cruel invasion of Ukraine, balancing that short-term crisis with the need to accelerate the longer-term transition to renewable energy. There is still a risk that it will get locked into fossil fuel infrastructure that actually increases emissions in the years going forward, and we have to be careful about that. There's more good news as well on the technology front. As Andrew said, we have the technologies we need. The International Energy Agency says for a 50% reduction, we have all the technologies we need with proven deployment models already available to us. The next 50% after 2030, we have the technologies that are in development. We see the pathway to improve them. We know how to get there. We've already seen last year, if you look at all the new electricity generation installed worldwide, 90% of it was renewable. It's now the cheapest source of electricity in almost the entire planet. Secondly, electric vehicles for the transportation sector. The penetration has reached the 10% level in multiple geographies. That's the point where you often see an inflection going much higher. Norway's already at 50%. All the automakers are going in that direction. Business is leading. Andrew and Marc, of course, are two wonderful examples. There are many others. And in the WEF this year, I have noticed a huge increase in the amount of passion and attention being paid by CEOs and other business leaders. It is for real. But as the Secretary General said in his brilliant speech earlier today, we are not winning. The crisis is still getting worse faster than we are deploying these solutions, and we need to make changes quickly. Emissions are still going up. All these promises of the last few years to cut emissions are still going up. When are we going to bring these emissions down? And just to put the science in a slightly different context, people are familiar with that thin blue line that the astronauts bring back in their pictures from space. That's the part of the atmosphere that has oxygen, the troposphere, and it's only 5 to 7 kilometers thick. That's what we're using as an open sewer. If you could drive a car straight up in the air at interstate highway speeds, you'd get to the top of that blue line in 5 minutes. And all the greenhouse gas pollution would be below you. We're still putting 162 million tons into it every single day. And the accumulated amount is now trapping as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day on the Earth. That's what's boiling the oceans, creating these atmospheric rivers and the rain bombs and sucking the moisture out of the land and creating the droughts and melting the ice and raising the sea level and causing these waves of climate refugees predicted to reach 1 billion in this century. Look at the xenophobia and political authoritarian trends that have come from just a few million refugees. What about 1 billion? We would lose our capacity for self-governance on this world. We have to act. So in answer to your question, I would say we have to have a sense of urgency much greater than we have yet had, and we need to make some changes. We've heard about divides at this conference between the North and South and the East and West. There's another divide, increasingly, between those who are old enough to be in positions of power and the young people of this world. Greta Thunberg was just arrested in Germany. I agree with her efforts to stop that coal mine in Germany. Young people around the world are looking at what we're doing. They look at the World Bank and they say, oh, you've got a climate denier in charge of the World Bank, so why are you surprised that the World Bank is completely failing to do its job? Secretary General says that. Everybody knows the World Bank is failing badly. Now we have the COP process. Okay, what do I say to these young activists that I train around the world when they come to me and they say, are you okay with putting the CEO of one of the largest oil companies in the world in as the president of the COP? Is that really okay? Well, it's not whether he's a nice guy or not, or whether he's intelligent. The appearance of a conflict of interest undermines confidence at a time when climate activists around the world, and I'm partly speaking for them right here on this stage, have come to the conclusion that the people in authority are not doing their job. There's a lot of blah, 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 as Greta says. There are a lot of words, and there are some meaningful commitments, but we are still failing badly. We need to have a supermajority process instead of unanimity in the COP. We cannot let the oil companies and gas companies and petro states tell us what is permissible. In the last COP, we were not allowed to even discuss scaling down oil and gas. Can't discuss it. A lot of the NDCs weren't even called for. Are we going to be able to discuss scaling down oil and gas in the next COP? Or putting the oil industry in charge of the COP? Is that going to tell young people around the world, we've just decided to not even disguise it anymore? Let me finish with this point on the industry. You've had problems in your area where you tried to get legislation and the oil and gas industry came in and fought you, right? In my state, same thing. Every piece of pro-climate legislation at the national level, the regional level, the local level, municipal level, the oil and gas industry and the coal industry, they come in and fight it tooth and nail. And they use their legacy network of political influence and wealth to stop progress. The rest of us have to reform these international institutions so that the people of this world, and including the young people of this world, can say, we are now in charge of our own destiny. We're going to stop using the sky as an open sewer. We're going to save the future and give people hope. We can do it, and remember that political will is itself a renewable resource.
Thank you. This is a nice segue for me to invite Colombian President, President Petro, because the last words from Al Gore, Vice President Al Gore, was political will. You took office very recently in August 2022 with a promise to drive social transformation for peace as well as for the environment. And you've also been a very strong advocate to mobilize all of humanity to address the climate crisis. And one of the key objectives of this meeting is to focus on how we can reshape and lay a new foundation for industrial agricultural systems, address changes that is very badly needed in our models of production and consumption, while dealing with the immediate issues of safeguarding lives, jobs, addressing water, food, and energy security issues. And I'd like you to share with us some of the ideas and changes you would like to propose, both for Colombia as well as for the global political community. Mr. President.
Gracias. Déjeme hablar de política en general y hacerme una pregunta que quisiéramos todos, dos quizás. Una, se puede ser optimista discursivamente si cuando mira las estadísticas de acumulación de CO2 en la atmósfera encuentras que cada vez estamos peor. Podemos hacer políticas y discursos políticamente correctos cuando sabemos que lo que significan esas estadísticas es que vamos al punto de no retorno y que el punto de no retorno significa la extinción de la vida. Mientras nos reunimos va pasando eso. Yo creo que a veces hay optimismos falsos que degeneran en inercias, en inacción, en una falta de voluntad política porque no queremos acometer las tareas que toca. Porque si, como sabemos hoy, las cosas están empeorando, lo que estamos haciendo no está bien. Nos estamos equivocando. Las sociedades, la política, el poder, la economía, el capitalismo. Y esta sería la segunda pregunta que haría, porque es una palabra que no se menciona, el capitalismo. ¿Puede el capitalismo que hemos conocido en los últimos 30 o 40 años superar la crisis climática que ayudó a provocar? Es una pregunta un tanto teórica, pero política esencialmente, porque si la respuesta es negativa, estamos perdiendo el tiempo, mientras nos acercamos al punto de no retorno. Ese último capitalismo que conocemos tiene un motor, una lógica. Ese motor es la ganancia ampliada, ampliar las ganancias de manera, y ahí su marca en la historia, desregularizada, sin límites políticos o sociales. Es el que tenemos. Ha provocado una especie de anarquía global, de capitalismos, de capitalistas individuales, empresariales, que tratan de maximizar su ganancia. La ganancia está ligada en el capital a la productividad, es decir, hacer más en menos tiempo, y la productividad a la energía. Y realmente casi que la única fuente de energía que se ha obtenido para ampliar la ganancia es el carbón, el petróleo y el gas. Ampliar la ganancia va ligado a ampliar el cambio químico de la atmósfera, casi como una correlación. Eso hay que detenerlo si queremos vivir en el planeta. ¿Ese capitalismo podrá hacerlo? Los datos de hoy demuestran que no. Luego, entonces tendríamos que hacer una aseveración un tanto dura. Si ese capitalismo no es capaz, o la humanidad se extingue con el capitalismo, o la humanidad supera el capitalismo para poder vivir en el planeta. Permítame ir a una segunda parte de esta reflexión. Supongamos que entonces hay un capitalismo diferente al que vivimos en estos días. Lo voy a llamar teóricamente un capitalismo descarbonizado. El capitalismo que podría superar la crisis climática. Ese capitalismo tendría que hacer unos cambios fundamentales en la manera de vivir, de existir y de hacer la política y el poder hoy. Por ejemplo, ese capitalismo tendría que decir explícitamente que la única manera para detener la crisis climática es llevar a cero el consumo del carbón y del petróleo. Cero emisiones, lo dice la ciencia. Llevar a cero significa eso en el terreno económico, que el capital ligado al petróleo, al carbón y al gas y sus complementarios tiene que desvalorizarse y ya. Bien dijo Gore, ahora está manejando ese capital las COP del mundo para saber por dónde seguía la lucha contra la crisis climática. Vamos mal. Si ese capitalismo descarbonizado pudiera existir, ese capitalismo tendría que aumentar el poder planificador de las naciones, la planificación pública. Y correlativamente, algo que no conocemos, la planificación pública multilateral, democrática y global, porque este es un tema global. ¿Por qué? Porque si se deja en el mercado y en el sistema de precios la solución de cambiar de unas energías a otras, resulta que las energías limpias no demuestran aún que hacen más productivo el trabajo y por tanto aumentan la ganancia, y el capitalismo individual no va a hacer la transición si eso no pasa. Como eso en el tiempo que necesitamos quizás no pase, se necesita planificación pública, el reemplazo del motor de la ganancia por la planificación humana que hoy no existe para poder hacer la transición a escala global. Eso significaría, por ejemplo, que las COP, que es lo que tenemos hoy, deberían tener poder vinculante. Fíjense ustedes que el Tratado de la Organización Mundial del Comercio, si usted lo evade por alguna razón, tiene una sanción, tiene un proceso. En cambio, lo que deciden las COPs son sugerencias que un gobernante puede tener o no tener en cuenta, son apenas consejos, porque un tratado de libre comercio sí es vinculante y las decisiones para salvar a la humanidad en el planeta no. Hay una diferencia en el poder. Ahora, y eso sería un capitalismo descarbonizado, que las COP tengan poder vinculante, es decir, que sus decisiones sean órdenes, implicaría que los tratados de la Organización Mundial del Comercio, que los tratados del Fondo Monetario Internacional se supediten a los acuerdos del clima y no al revés. Por ejemplo, implicaría una reforma del sistema financiero mundial, que hoy no existe. Por ejemplo, y voy a terminar, ¿cómo se financia la transición? Si vas a la COP, vengo de ella, de la COP 27, me dijeron, endeúdese. Pero si todos los países están sobreendeudados, ¿cómo nos vamos a endeudar más para hacer la transición? Propusimos algo que causó algo de risa. ¿Y por qué no se canjea, se cambia la deuda que tienen los países y los procesos productivos por acción climática? De tal manera que se liberaran recursos presupuestales para acometer la adaptación y la mitigación. ¿Por qué no se desvaloriza la deuda mundial? Lo cual significa un cambio también del sistema del poder. ¿Por qué existen paraísos fiscales en este momento cuando eso debilita la financiación de la transición energética, por ejemplo? Estos temas que abordaría un capitalismo descarbonizado hoy no están en la discusión. Mientras no estén, no hay capacidad humana para pasar a una economía descarbonizada. Y las consecuencias podrían ser: el actual capitalismo es incapaz, puede perecer con la humanidad, puede que un capitalismo descarbonizado sea una simple ilusión y lamentablemente puede que comencemos los tiempos de la extinción si no somos capaces como humanidad de actuar políticamente en el camino en que en realidad disminuyan concretamente las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero en la atmósfera. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, President Petro. Thank you. We are running out of time, unfortunately, right? But before I invite Yo-Yo Ma on stage, right, I would like each of the panelists to leave us with one word. This session is about leadership. It's about leadership at a time of cascading crises. It's about leadership through Earth's new normal. So, Marc, maybe starting with you, just one word to leave with the audience.
Now.
Yes. Now.
I think now is a good word.
Oh, now. Roshni.
Fresh water.
Andrew?
Yeah, look, I just have to say belief, leadership, action, collaboration.
Fawn?
Indigenous.
Early to bed, early to rise, work like hell and organize.
And President Petro?
Cero uso del carbón, del petróleo y del gas.
Thank you.
Very good.
Leadership is about the heart, mind, and soul. And our chairman, Klaus, would also tell you that it's also about muscle and nerve. As the concluding segment of this plenary, we would like to bring to you also the emotional power of music to drive meaningful action. And who better than Yo-Yo Ma, who has lived his life reaching for the unimaginable and also working together to make it happen. So let us welcome on stage Yo-Yo Ma.
Huay, what an extraordinary panel you have assembled. I've listened carefully to everybody, and I was riveted. And one thing that struck me is how incredibly passionate you, each one of you, is. Not only have you assembled vast amounts of information, turned it into deep knowledge, but you've turned that knowledge into a deep personal commitment, a mission, which to me is a form of love. So thank you for that. And while I was listening to all of you and to our wonderful scientists, I thought of something that the distinguished physicist Freeman Dyson wrote shortly before he died. He said he believed that the speed of cultural evolution, is now faster than the speed of biological evolution. So what does that mean? To me, it's something very simple. It means that we now hold our destiny in our hands. And that's what you're all talking about. And so I think that it means it's our choice. It's our choice to make, to whether we will succeed, to thrive, and or we will be actually be the instruments of the next extinction. So one thing I would like to say is that I know nobody likes to be told what to do. Certainly nobody in this room. And so, but deep personal commitment comes from individual choice. And this is another thing that you're talking about. And deep personal choice comes from our finding the on switch button, which each one of us, only what we know where it is. So while I play something for you, I would like all of you to consider, to think of where that switch is. And once you locate it, make that choice. Thank you.